Welcome back. You're listening to Jason Lee Willis's Bible study series, Examining Moses. Today's episode, The Roundabout Way. So after 400 years of dwelling in Egypt, with at least a few hundred years in slavery, and a bizarre paranormal battle, the Hebrews are suddenly free and very wealthy. What the text says. Exodus chapter 12, verse 29. And it came to pass that at midnight the Lord smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. And then later, in verse 35, and the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and they borrowed of the Egyptians jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent unto them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. And then later, now the sojourning of the children of Israel, who dwelt in Egypt, was 430 years. And it came to pass, at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass, that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So, did Moses send out a group text? Now, I'm not trying to be facetious here, but I really wonder how the Hebrew folks found out. From what I can tell, Moses and his family have always lived around the Thebes neighborhood, probably just upstream from the palace. Most of the Hebrews, however, lived down in the land of Goshen, so there is a logistics problem happening here. There are hundreds of square miles of Hebrews to collect. While it later describes them departing from a town in the Delta, Moses and family would have had to gather up the southern Hebrews and begin heading toward the Delta. The snowball would have built as it headed downstream. For Hebrews, it is a celebration. But for the rest of Egypt, it is a terrible day of mourning. God put the bad guy in their place, and all Gentiles, including Gingermandius, submitted to God's authority. In fact, the Gentiles probably slowed the snowball down, for as Moses and crew passed, they had to accept the spoils of victory. By the time they reached the Delta, the Hebrew population would have been ready to leave. During this time, the Passover tradition was created through necessity. When the snowball rolled by, every Hebrew had to gather up their belongings and quickly bake some bread for the road. While Exodus clearly defines a specific day for the killing of the lamb, Nisan the 14th, and the breaking of the bread, Nisan the 15th, the full Festival of Passover is a 7-day celebration. Why? Well, 7 is a good number. It is impractical to think that all Hebrews baked bread on Nisan the 15th because news would not have been delivered via text, right? Consider that the snowball of celebration took 7 days to roll from Thebes to the Delta. At each stop, the decree of Gingermandius is heard, and the new religious holiday of Passover is explained. A year later, everyone could do it on the same day, the same way. But in the first 7 days of freedom, the celebration would have been a sloppy mess. Was the exact date of the 430 years from Moses leaving Thebes, or from the Hebrews leaving the Delta? Not really sure, but somebody must have noted it. In chapter 12, verse 37, it reads, And the children of Israel sojourned from Ramses to Succoth. About 600,000 on foot that were men, beside children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even very much cattle. So the biomass of Hebrews gathers up in the delta, near a place called Ramses. Again, the tone is somber jubilation, with a sense of hurry. Moses, for example, had traveled at least 400 miles in his 7 days of freedom, which is a reasonable 57 miles a day. That sounds unreasonable? Well, a casual stroll is 20 minutes per mile, meaning you could walk 3 miles an hour. Even with an hour for breakfast, an hour for lunch, and an hour for supper, to butter your Passover bread, there would have been 12 hours of walking. So a conservative progression would be 36 miles a day. If in a rush, like the text implies, I think the 57 miles a day is quite reasonable, especially at the beginning. With a biomass of 2 to 3 million, that would be the 600,000 men, a wife, a kid, yikes, that adds up quickly. With a pace of that many people, it certainly would slow, but that would have only been at the land of Goshen. The anachronistic reference to Ramses, which many archaeologists take a stab at as the modern-day Tel El Daba or Quantir, and the also nebulous Succoth, which modern-day archaeologists tentatively label Tel El Mashuta, or El Arish, that one's easier to say, also implies that the biomass traveled a little bit north. The more conservative location of Succoth means they traveled toward the sea about a distance of 36 miles. So that's what the Bible kind of gives as a pace. But what were they expecting? War, more likely than not. Later, we learn that both Gingermandius and the kingdoms around the Promised Land are surprised when Moses doesn't directly march up the road. After all, there are 3 ancient roads leaving from the delta. The route known as the Way to Arabia is the most difficult, cutting across the northern part of the Sinai Peninsula to the upper corner of the Gulf of Aqaba. That would be the right finger in the V-shaped fingers of the northern Red Sea. It's about 200 miles to Aqaba. The middle route is known as the Way of Shur, which goes through some pretty arid regions, passing Masada, the Dead Sea, before arriving at Jerusalem. If invasion was the purpose, this would have been the most direct path. It is also about 200 miles to Jerusalem. The easiest path would have been the route known as the Way of the Philistines, which is a little anachronistic since we don't have Philistines yet. This road is also known as the King's Highway in antiquity, because it is a major trade route along the coast, connecting the continent of Africa to Europe and Asia. Even then, they relied on trade. This road would have been 200 to 300 miles into the heart of Canaan. Our brickmakers might not have had chariots or horses, but they were plentiful and powerful, capable of overwhelming any opposition with sheer numbers. The Way of the Philistines would have given them food and water also. Instead, God had other plans. Exodus chapter 13, verse 7. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Succoth, and camped in Etham, in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night, from before the people. Now, here's where things get messy. This biomass easily traveled through the delta from Ramses to Succoth, which was logical and expected. Then, God shocked everybody. First, he appeared as a pillar, which is pretty obvious based on the previously mysterious ways of God. A father can point at the pillar and shrug, telling his family, God is leading us. This pillar leads by both day and by night, it seems. Now, based on the logical and accepted location of Succoth, there are really only a few directions to go. You can't go north because of the sea. You can't go south because that would lead you up the Nile. You can't go west because that is the way to Libya. You can only go east or southeast. East involves all three highways, which would have made sense. Instead, God chose none of the above. Although the chosen King James Version text does not use the words, some newer English translations use the phrase, the roundabout way, to describe verse 18. The reason is that the Sinai Peninsula is 3/4 surrounded by water, the Gulf of Suez, the Gulf of Aqaba, with a bit of the Red Sea. Veering to the southeast into the peninsula would mean you'd have to go 700 extra miles before you'd end up right back in southern Israel. Even to Moses, who also followed the pillar, this would have been unexpected. It would also have surprised Ramses and the enemies in Canaan. Only God knew that the Hebrews needed to be spiritually purged before the invasion, and to do this, they needed the 10 Commandments and a good 40 years of isolation. Before arriving at the Mount. So far, the only controversial thought I've had is a 7-day explanation for the Passover festival. Now, I'm going to take issue with conventional thought. What is the conventional thought? For the past 1700 years, the accepted path of the Exodus has Moses and the Hebrews traveling right into the Sinai Peninsula. Isn't that what I just suggested? Isn't that the roundabout way? We have a big problem. Before reaching Mount Sinai, Moses and the Hebrews must cross something called Yam Soph. The King James translators read the Old Hebrew Yam Soph and translated it as Red Sea. So what's the problem? In the days of the King James Bible, few Christians had a Bible, let alone a map or even a Bible map. Modern archaeology also did not exist. So when a bunch of evangelized Vikings pictured Succoth and Etham, they just nodded and trusted. In the last century, we've mostly agreed on the location of Ramses and Succoth. Yet if the Hebrews traveled the roundabout way and ended up at the accepted location of Mount Sinai, they don't really cross the Red Sea. What? The Hebrews were on the eastern edge of the delta when they departed, right? Then the pillar took them another direction, which either meant southeast or it veered south, then west, then south, and back into Egypt, which would have been an act of war. Gingermandius, Ramses the Great, would have freaked out. Only then could they be on the left finger of the V of the Red Sea. Now remember, the Suez Canal is a modern creation, so departing from Succoth meant a strange retreat with a biomass of almost 2 million. Yet, first cross Yam Soph, then reach Mount Sinai. Before I deal with my heretical view of Mount Sinai in episode 11, I first need to explain my issues with the modern reading of Yam Soph. A bitter theory. To make the modern theory work, the Hebrews need to cross a body of water before ending up at Jabal al-Musa, which is St. Catherine's Monastery, otherwise known as Mount Sinai, otherwise known as Mount Horeb. Choices do they have? Again, the zigzag back into Egypt doesn't work for anybody that I know of, so eliminate that thought. Instead, the Bitter Lakes theory has emerged. For this to work, they need an incredibly slow migration route, and to also ignore the logical location of Succoth. For, on the edge of the delta, there is a medium-sized lake. Now, in comparison to Minnesota lakes, it is much smaller than Mille Lacs, but larger than Lura Lake. Currently, post-Suez Canal dredging, it is about 10 miles long and about 7 miles wide. It drains toward the Gulf of Suez, which is the Red Sea, so kind of the same water? Scholars have even debated the word Soph, S-O-P-H, thinking red and reed might be a point of contention. You see, the body of water is known as Great Bitter Lake, and it is a bit of a swamp. It's large but shallow, and as a result, surrounded by reeds. Scholars like it because it is on a path between the delta and Jabal al-Musa, and it is pretty easy for God to separate since it is shallow. Hold on. Yes, the Bitter Lake theory allows the creator of the universe some relief from the heavy lifting. You see, the Red Sea is pretty deep, and the Great Bitter Lake is shallow, so God wouldn't have to lift as much water. Or, if you didn't want God to be a visible active presence like a pillar of fire, then you could have a natural explanation for dividing the water. Say, an earthquake or a tornado. Either of these natural phenomena could cause the waters of Great Bitter Lake to part, allowing the Hebrews to escape. The miracle is drowning the Egyptian army in such a shallow lake. You see, the Hebrews would not have been trapped in this location. The Egyptians could have seen them on the other side and driven around the Great Bitter Lake. Why risk it? Plus, in Exodus 14, verse 20, it describes how it took quite a bit of time, at least all night, for the Hebrews to cross, which does not seem to fit the width of the Great Bitter Lake. My issues with logic cause other issues. The Great Bitter Lake is still in the delta, and just a bit off of any logical paths to get to Canaan. Ramses the Great would not have seen this as a change in plan or even a foolish plan from Moses. Plus, on the other side of the Great Bitter Lakes, they are still in Egypt. Prior to crossing Yam Soph, the Hebrews complained that they had been led out of Egypt and into a bad wilderness. Yet, the Great Bitter Lake is still in Egypt. Heck, it's still in the Delta. If you subscribe to the Great Bitter Lake theory, they are 20 miles away from the farm fields of the Delta and just 50 miles away from the Nile. The real Yam Soph. My support for Ramses the Great as the hard-hearted pharaoh rests in the name of the city of Ramesses, which was dedicated to his firstborn daughter, as well as the timing of the 18th dynasty figures and their motivations. A uniquely 18th dynasty trait was the use of bricks for building. Check. Yet, if it is indeed the 18th dynasty, then the capital is Thebes. If Thebes, then Ramses and all the plagues happen around Thebes instead of the Delta. Check. Even though the text never says Thebes, it does make a distinction that the land of Goshen was saved from the plagues, in particular, the plague of locusts. To recap, the locusts were really annoying and ate everything green. When the plague was over, it describes how a west wind blew the locusts away. Specifically, it blew the locusts into Yam Soph. Again, no locusts in the Delta. Lots of locusts around the pharaoh. Where was the pharaoh? Thebes. What is east of Thebes? The Red Sea. If Yam Soph was meant to be Great Bitter Lake, then the land of Goshen would have been filled with locusts. No. For the locusts to be blown into Great Bitter Lake, the wind direction would have been almost due north. Nope. The Bible says west. The locusts were blown from Thebes into the large body of water directly east of Thebes, now known as the Red Sea. You see, it doesn't matter whether Soph means red or reed. The text defines where Yam Soph should be. It can't be the Great Bitter Lake. So if Moses and the Hebrews did not cross the Great Bitter Lake, then when and where did they cross any water? It would help to know, absolutely, where Etham was located. But even without that, look at the text. Verse 21. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night, from before the people. Again, if you take simple walking pace and put the Hebrews on the eastern edge of the Delta and have them go anywhere but one of the three roads, then the above passage would have meant they traveled quite a few miles. They could travel by day and night with the pillar of fire, which meant they could easily put on 50 miles a day. Exodus chapter 14. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon, before it shall ye encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say unto the children of Israel, They are entangled in the land, and the wilderness hath shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he shall follow after them. And I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. Okay. Ignore the place names, since today we have no certainty of the locations. God's plan is to do something crazy, so that it'll appear that they have become entangled, which would bait Pharaoh into changing his mind and reclaiming the Hebrews. Why would he reclaim them? First, they are not attacking the Canaanites, which would have helped him. Second, Moses led them into a location that has shut them in. Again, this does not match the Great Bitter Lake. What does it match? Again, if God is indeed leading them to the Red Sea, then they would turn south from Succoth and head directly into the Sinai Peninsula. If you did this, sticking to the Gulf of Suez, you would eventually pin yourself in a sharp peninsula with the Red Sea in front of you. If God led them by day and night along the Gulf of Suez, then the Hebrews were still technically in Egyptian turf, where dozens of historical mines that provided jewels for the pyramids were located. The Hebrews would be watched and mocked as they marched themselves into a corner. Of course, God had another motive. Now, back to Exodus chapter 13, verse 7, God said, "Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war and they return to Egypt." Again, if you subscribe to the Great Bitter Lake theory, God led them through a swamp to end up in Egypt. However, if God led them along the Gulf of Suez toward the tip of the peninsula, then crossing the body of water, the actual Red Sea, would land them in Arabia, which would prevent them from ever returning to Egypt. Isolation mattered to God. What's in a name? The town of Blue Earth is located in Martin County instead of Blue Earth County. The town of Faribault is located in Rice County instead of Faribault County. Mount Sinai is located... see the problem? For the past 1,700 years, the dot for Mount Sinai has been Jabal al-Musa, located in the middle of the Sinai Peninsula. After all, if you cross the Great Bitter Lake, you've got to find a mountain on the other side. Jabal al-Musa is definitely a mountain, but it is surrounded by hundreds of other mountains in the middle of a mountainous peninsula. Emperor Constantine's mom, Helena, had put the location of Mount Sinai on maps of Christian sites when she ordered a chapel to be built at the location of the burning bush. By the year 565, it was the location of a monastery. And for the better part of 1,500 years, it has been the site of religious pilgrimages. Why? Mom said so. Again, Helena was not Helena Jones, mother of greatest archaeologist known to mankind, Indiana Jones. She was a tourist. She might have been a very devout and saintly, but her credentials? Probably nothing more than an English degree from Mankato State University. See my point? So, what do Helena and I have in common? The Bible. Exodus chapter 15, verse 22 reads, "So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then he went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water." So, eastern shore of the Red Sea? Check. Wilderness of Shur? Sure. 3 days into the wilderness without water? Everywhere along the Red Sea. This line does not help. Let's try another. Genesis chapter 25, verse 18. "And they," Ishmael's descendants, "dwelt from Havilah unto Shur," that is, before Egypt, "as thou goest toward Syria. And he died in the presence of his brethren." Havilah is Iraq. Shur? Here, the lands of Ishmael, who is credited as the father of the Arabian people, is described as being east of Egypt. What is on the other side of the Red Sea? Arabia. If Shur was in the Sinai Peninsula, it would redefine the Arabian Peninsula. But if Shur is the eastern shore of the Red Sea, then that is the perfect description of Arabia. So, Shur equals Arabia. Now, go back up and read Exodus chapter 15, verse 22 again. God led them from the Red Sea into Arabia. Is there anything else to support Arabia? Sure is. Galatians chapter 4, verse 22. For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he of the free woman was by promise, which things are an allegory. For these are the 2 covenants, the one from the Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. Now, I know Paul is not an archaeologist either, but his assumption is that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. He doesn't explain himself because he is making another point. But notice how he brings up Ishmael via his mom. Ishmael, father of the Arabian people? Arabian people are from Arabia. Don't forget, Moses first went to Mount Horeb, otherwise known as Sinai, when he visited the burning bush. Remember how he was hiding from an Egyptian pharaoh by leaving Egypt? Well, with the Great Bitter Lake theory, Moses hid in Egyptian territory. So where is Midian? Midian is up by the Gulf of Aqaba, meaning Jethro Reuel lives in the northwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula. And if Midian is in Arabia, then where is Mount Sinai? Remember, Moses crosses Yam Soph, and then he is suddenly in Midian, where he leaves his wife and his kids with his father-in-law. It makes perfect sense, except for the miracle, for all of this to be happening in Arabia. Sorry, Helena. You've been listening to Jason Lee Willis's Examining Moses. Today's episode was The Roundabout Way. Next time, we'll be looking into the Amalekites, which seems historical until you realize their name translates as the Bloodlickers. If you've enjoyed the episode, look for more at my website or Facebook page. Until next time.